So welcome everyone, welcome here for this session on addressing inequalities through youth entrepreneurship within the context of the Commission of Social Development. Welcome everyone, whether you are a delegate, whether you are a diplomat, a young entrepreneur, or whatever. This session is meant exactly to bring us together, explore some of the challenges around this topic, and explore also and share some of the experiences that I think everyone here can share in this context. And exactly in order to go in this direction, we have a certain number of speakers that are going to share their experiences. I'd say that all of them are entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, maybe in different ways, because entrepreneurship is very much of a buzzword in our era. And so they're going to explain, in fact, what are the ways or what is their interpretation or their lively interpretation of the word entrepreneurship. But in order to start, I would like to do two things. The first one is to set the context where we are going to talk. And the second one is to share a short experience. As I said, one of the rules of the game in this 1 hour and 15 minutes we have together is to share experiences. So the context, I'm going to share the context in two ways. One is through a number of colors, which are, these colors are somehow the manifesto of the generation that is going to go on, or that is going to be there until 2030. And what are these colors? These colors are 17, and these colors are the Sustainable Development Goals. I think I'm realizing myself in my experience, and I think everyone is realizing in your experience, that more and more the Sustainable Development Goals are really representing a manifesto for our world in the next decade and more. And in fact, we might even say that this is going to go on for the whole century, as many of these challenges are going to be there. The second thing, however, and this is why we're here, is that if we have a manifesto, oftentimes when you have a dream, is because eventually that dream is not matching the reality yet. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a dream. And so we have this manifesto exactly because many of these goals are not matched today. And this is represented indeed by the number of inequalities that, especially in the working place and the workforce in general, and especially the youth, are facing. So what is the social protection that is available to the younger generation today? And is youth entrepreneurship eventually capable to provide some of the responses that social protection is facing today? Are the wages equal, and why they are not? What are the gender inequalities that are experienced in the workplace? What are the differences that are there between countries or between areas of the world? So this is the context that we are exploring, where we are framing our session today. On one side, we have a manifesto, all these beautiful colors, and we all try to stay closer and closer and to abide to those Sustainable Development Goals. But on the other side, there is the reality, and the reality is made of a number of inequalities. Now, within this context, I think the initiative of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs that is inviting us here, and again, we want to thank you, Daniel Abbas, for being the mind behind it, is in a way also showing that at the UN level, at the level of international organizations, those topics are more and becoming more and more relevant. And so I think this is also why this session is organized in this context. Now, before starting to give the word to the panelists, I just want to share a small piece of an experience which, as I said, I mean, the most important part here is to share concepts through our experiences. And the experience is this. If you might remember, I think there was a pretty famous book from a Canadian author that came out in 2001, which was called The Life of P. The Life of P is a novel, is mainly a fantasy novel of a young boy in South India. Well, I have to say that I was very passionate about it when I read it back in 2001, but recently I became even more passionate by the life of another P. And P is a social entrepreneur who she is based in Europe, somewhere in Europe. I'm not going to give too many details about her, but I'm going to share just a tiny bit of her story. Her story is when she was 28, she was working in a very big company in Europe, and she started to face by herself a number of the inequalities that we will try to address here. So she was paid, she wasn't understanding why she was paid less than her male colleagues. She wasn't understanding why she was working more, but she didn't have any pension fund, nor healthcare insurance. And so at a certain point, she decided to leave her possible career in this very big company, and she decided to start her own social enterprise. And while building the social enterprise, she started to build the social enterprise, taking one by one the Sustainable Development Goals and trying to make her social enterprise to work with those Sustainable Development Goals. So she started to, the social enterprise she has is a social enterprise that organizes guided tours, but those guided tours are made by people who were previously unemployed or homeless even. And so she addresses no poverty and zero hunger, and in fact also health, because she normally organizes a path for these people. She works in a building which has solar panels, so she addresses other of these SDGs. And she works in a way that is very horizontal, addressing inequality in her social enterprise. And she also works in a city which was named several times one of the most sustainable cities. Now, I'm not going to go on with this, but this is just to say that there are examples of hopes where those inequalities and the SDGs can really help to go in this direction. Okay, I stop here. And just to set the rules of the games, this is for the other panelists. We have each panelist has about 8 minutes to share your experience. We have 2 panelists that are joining us via video conference. And then we really want to stick to the timing because we really want to use at least 15-20 minutes at the end to listen to questions in a very interactive way, sharing experiences and have responses from both sides. So right now we have the opening remarks of Daniela Abbas. Daniela Abbas is the director of the UNDESA Division for Inclusive Social Development. She has a very long experience in international relations. Daniela, floor is yours, and thank you.
Thanks. If you're interested in my bio, I'm going to be 58, so you can imagine it's a very long one. So you can find it online. Thank you very much, Francesca. Okay, now we are going to entertain today all of you with the wonderful speakers who have quite a strong Italian accent, so enjoy it. Because I found out Francesco is from Italy, I'm from Italy, Pietro is from Italy, Richard, his mom, I do not know if you speak any Italian, but his mom is from Italy, so Kelly, Any relationships to Italy at all? No. And Amin, who is actually the one who helped and is the organizer, together also with support of Isabel, he's married to an Italian woman. Viva l'Italia. Now. Okay, so maybe it means that Italians are very interested into entrepreneurship. Actually, we are quite famous and known for middle, small enterprises. So, and I think that many of you are running probably small, medium enterprises, and I do know that others, like Kelly, she's actually making her enterprise grow into something majestic. So compliments. I don't know much about Victoria and the other gentleman. I can't read your name there, what you are doing, but I will make my introduction very short. Italians tend to talk a lot. You might have noticed Francesco as a moderator. He had a long introduction. So I will make it short. We are very much interested in the potential of youth and entrepreneurships, particularly now that we are facing the fourth industrial revolution. In the fourth industrial revolution, as Francesco said, the game is changing in terms of social protection, in terms of pensions, security of jobs, what kind of work is required, and therefore, based on the kind of work, what kind of employment can we offer? And so how young people, youth entrepreneurs, are thinking in terms of restructuring and reviewing the way they work, not only in terms of products and services, but also in terms of internal policies of their enterprises to make sure that inequalities are not created among workers, as Francesco said, wage-wise, pension-wise, et cetera, healthcare, having children who is going to take care of it, et cetera. And then also in terms of maybe creating networks among yourselves, a strong network of entrepreneurs in different parts of the world, so that since we live in a global world where people move, and it means that the jobs are not secure and safe as they were, in the past. You studied something and you knew that you would have been employed by an entrepreneur, and probably your whole career would have been in that enterprise for the next 30, 35 years until you retired, if you were living in areas where industry or else were developed. But the same applies to other areas of the world that are mainly rural areas. There you also have entrepreneurs, but they are entrepreneurs in the agricultural field. So, so what kind of actions youth entrepreneurs are taking, being facing now the fourth industrial revolution, which is mainly STEM, science, math, engineering, technology. And we know that in the next, just thinking of the United States of America, in the next 5-10 years, 80% of works in the retail area are going to be lost, driving long vehicles, I don't know. So how are we, young entrepreneurs, preparing the path also for those people who are not necessarily young, but they might be out of job pretty soon? So how are you planning to engage and hire and people who might be middle age or so, with families and children to support? So how are you planning that? Because otherwise you yourselves are going to create inequalities among young people, and people are not that young any longer when it comes to work and employment. And are you planning also to offer maybe internal training courses, or to negotiate with the universities, academia, or vocational training institutions on how to train and retrain, the skills of the people you have employed in your enterprise, be that they are young or old? Because nowadays, you really need to be constantly updated and retrain and update your skills so that you can easily, allow me to say jump, sorry, silly, sorry, I needed to be a little bit, I love to have fun in life. Honestly, I do. So jump from one job to the other one, okay, if you're not trained and skilled to do that. We are looking at this topic, though, in a little bit more also serious and policy-oriented manner in the flagship that we are preparing. It's a flagship on youth and enterprises. We already started working on that. Isabel is going to be the leading author of this very important flagship that we are preparing. So I encourage you to look at the various topics that Francesco mentioned, that I mentioned nowadays. And remember, if you do create networks or federations or alliances, so that in this world that is based on mobility, some stuff that you have in your enterprise might be skilled for another enterprise later on, because you might change the kind of services and products. But in this way, you create also a network of exchange of workers or employed people if and where necessary. And by doing this, you promote one thing, the dialogue. You create the space for dialoguing who can be hired where, and which is also one of the reasons of the United Nations, to give the space to have dialogues, conversations. By doing that, you will promote indirectly a key thing for the United Nations, multilateralism, which is unfortunately now suffering a lot. Countries or people or groups tend to talk to each other, 2 or 3 people maybe, and leaving behind others. This creates inequalities. 2 or 3 powerful countries might have agreements among themselves when it comes to entrepreneurships, and maybe they are leaving other countries behind. So this creates additional inequalities. This is why sitting around the table and you, with your enterprises, bringing also the message of how relevant it is to keep having a dialogue among countries, among enterprises, will also support the endeavors of the United Nations to promote multilateralism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for the introduction, and thank you once again for gathering, in fact, us here. And now we move to our next speaker, who's Kelly Lovell from Canada. I have to say, I'm not gonna, of course, say the age of Kelly, but I was thinking she has more or less the same experience as Daniela by reading her CV. So I think she really has a lot to say, and it's not the first time that I meet her. As I said, as I was saying before, she's an entrepreneur, and she expressed her way of being an entrepreneur in many different ways. So Kelly, floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. So my passion is harnessing the creativity and potential of the youth generation. We're 2 billion strong around the world, and I really believe that we're a change generation. Much of the conversations that both Francesco and Daniela had mentioned, we are at a cusp right now where, although there's a lot of inequalities and change happening in the workforce, we're also at a time where there's more resource and access for individuals to grow their skills and solve the challenges they see in the community with the right support systems. And that's what I'm passionate about. My story started at the age of 19. I started my first business, and it started in helping my peers solve local issues as young entrepreneurs and coaching them. But I soon learned that as much as I could help my peers on the right path, unless I worked with public and private sector to actually do systemic change and address these barriers that youth were facing, that we wouldn't actually be able to bridge the gap. So very much like Danielle had mentioned, the focus of dialogue, more importantly, open dialogue between sectors, nations, and generations, I think is crucial to achieving the SDGs. When we look at reducing inequalities through youth entrepreneurship, we first have to understand the landscape that we're facing when we're looking at the future of work. 40 million young people enter the workforce every year, many of them already without the skills that they need to actually get the jobs, or become, if they do get one, is usually underemployment. And the reason being is education can't keep up with the rapid pace that the workplaces and the economies are changing. And you can't expect education to continue. We print textbooks. We can't keep reprinting them every time something changes. So we're entering an era where upskilling and reskilling is crucial. But when we look at this issue, we often look at it from the lens that only young people are affected. So we have a lot of executives that turn their backs, say, I don't need to worry about that. But the challenge that we're facing with the fourth industrial revolution is it's not just those entering the workforce that are going to be affected. Those in the workforce are going to be affected. Management is going to be affected. And because of that, everyone is moving towards a generation of lifelong learning. The challenge is right now we can't really track or evaluate lifelong learning because experiences are quite subjective. What I might do and what you might do, although we may be doing similar skills, maybe I'm volunteering and serving as a marketing director for a project or event or event coordinator, it's comparing apples and oranges. You can't really measure and evaluate one person's experience and life experience and skills versus another without that regulating body like we have in formal education. So my passion is solving that gap by creating a system that standardizes the assessment of skill development outside a formal classroom and workplace settings. By doing that, we're able to create a system to upskill and reskill on our own initiative, which is free and accessible to all, leading to free access to education to those who need it, and reducing inequalities not just for those in the workplace, but more importantly, also those who have barriers to access to the workplace to begin with. Those who don't have good transcripts and grades graduating school, those who didn't even graduate school, minority groups, by being able to demonstrate our applied skills and life experiences, we're able to bring more to the table and show our more holistic self. So this is what I'm passionate about and how I entered on my entrepreneurship journey. And I started, when we're learning about kind of experiences, I really want to preface this for anyone who's watching this who's a young entrepreneur, someone who's just thinking about it but doesn't feel like they have what it takes to be an entrepreneur. I haven't heard yet the stories of all of my colleagues here on the panel, but I would anticipate that many of them would probably tell you a story that they didn't necessarily anticipate becoming an entrepreneur right away, or their journey to entrepreneurship was very organic or unexpected. Because most entrepreneurs don't actually consciously say, I'm growing up and being an entrepreneur. We find problems and we take the attitude that who better else to solve them than ourselves? If no one else is going to do it, we can. And we take the initiative to try and find a solution. And through that journey, we end up developing into who we are today, and along the way getting a slew of different skills that you probably didn't ever anticipate ever having to take on these roles. And that is very much my story. I started off with just a passion of seeing my peers and all the incredible change they're creating in community, but without the support and direction they needed. And I decided to try and help them do that. And once I worked with them, I realized that there was gaps in terms of the resources that they needed. So as a non-tech founder, I started a tech startup that now does everything that works on blockchain and big data without the experience to necessarily have started that from the get-go, a media company, and learned how to work a camera, learned all these skills that I never anticipated learning. I started to go to school for biomedical science, completely different. And what I learned from that experience is the life skills, the experiential situations that you put yourself in. Those real-world experiences prepare you for the future better than anything else. The fourth industrial revolution, we know that we're going to be replaced by machines. The 4 skills that will serve us well in the future of work are work readiness, the ability to take initiative, take responsibility, and learn and adapt. Soft skills, because unlike hard skills, soft skills like creativity, complex problem solving, design thinking, all of these things, these are things that cannot be replaced by machines as easily as the hard skills that we're learning right now in school. And more importantly, entrepreneurship. Because if we don't have jobs, we can create jobs for ourselves. And that's really what I hope everyone can take away from this is it's really about taking initiative to solve the challenges you face. And when you see a problem, don't think someone better fix that. Instead, consider how can I fix that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and thank you specifically for reminding us of the importance of the human being in the whole story related to how the direction that the world is going. We now move to our next panelist, who's joining us from via video conference. Her name is Victoria Alonso Perez, and she has lots of experience, and I would say not only experience on Earth, but in fact also something related to entrepreneurship in the space. How? Victoria, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me, and I'm very excited to be able to join remotely. I agree with a lot that has been said in the sense of many times you don't know you're going to be an entrepreneur. It's just finding the right problem. And I think that kind of happened to me. I'm originally from Uruguay. I am an electronics engineer. But when I was a teenager, I was like around 12 or 13 years old. There was a very big outbreak of foot and mouth disease in Uruguay and in the whole region. And so at that point is when I started thinking if there could be a system capable of detecting these diseases in the animals remotely. But, that's as many ideas that I had. It's something that stayed in my mind, but I didn't do much about it until later when I was already an electronics engineer. I saw that there was a call for young entrepreneurs, for young innovators from the International Telecommunication Union. And what they proposed was for innovators to propose a solution to a problem in the region. And I immediately thought about this thing that I thought many years ago before about monitoring animals remotely. And I was working with small satellites at the time. And I figured out that I could use a small satellite, like directly a CubeSat, which is like kind of like a little box that is sent to space, to be able to track the animals. So I kind of used the sensors that were in the small satellite and so created something that the animals could wear and could send information about their location at all times. So I sent the solution. I created the whole business plan. I did everything on my own. And I had the help from my dad. He helped me with all the business plan and the accountant stuff. My sister, she did all the logos and all the graphics. So it was kind of like a family thing. And I sent the application to the competition. And then to my surprise, some months later, I was told that I won the competition. And I was so excited. And then I get another email that says, okay, well, then you have to tell us how you're going to spend the funds that we're giving you. And at that time, I'm like, what? Maybe I should read the guidelines. And then in the guidelines, it said, the funding is for you to start your startup. And I literally had to go to Google and Google startup because I didn't know what that was. And I was like, wow, this is exciting. This is to start I can start the project like a company. And I remember that they took us to Dubai to do some courses for 2 weeks. And then I understood they gave us some lessons. And for example, they explained to us about investors. I had no idea why a person would invest money in an idea that I had. So I kind of became an entrepreneur by accident. I always knew that I wanted to have my own project and have my own company. But I at that time, I was, I think, 24 years old. And the only thing I thought about was like doing a PhD in aerospace engineering, which is what I love. I love space. So that was my path forward. And then after I got this course, I was like, oh, I can actually do something that can have an impact. I can actually become an entrepreneur and have my own project. And I really love this project. And it's something that I really wanted to do. But I do not know if I had the confidence to do it. And now when I won the competition and they gave me the funds, I definitely got, if somebody trusted in me to make me the winner of the competition, then it's because, maybe I can do it. So I started it. That was 2012. And it's been a really great and interesting ride of being an entrepreneur, and not only an entrepreneur, but a social entrepreneur. Because there is nothing better than doing things that can actually have an impact. And yeah, that was a bit of my story. And then about how to, for example, foster entrepreneurship in the countries. As I said, I had no idea about investors. I didn't know who to bring into my company. You know, a stranger just tells you that he wants to put money, and I didn't know much. And one resource that was great for me was that in Uruguay, there is a research agency. It's the National Research and Innovation Agency. And in that, they provide funds for entrepreneurs to start your idea. So I got the first funding, besides the competition that I got the first fundings to build the first prototype through this agency. And that was great because with those funds, we could do the whole prototype. We could stay for a whole year. And in that year, I could actually learn a lot of stuff of entrepreneurship and start building the company.
Thanks a lot, Victoria, for sharing your experience. I guess you stay with us until the end, so I guess there will be questions, in fact, for you on the different ways that you manage some of the challenges that you mentioned during your intervention. And we go to another speaker who's here with us, also joining us via video conference, Kartik Sauney. And pardon me if the pronunciation of the name is not exactly correct. I guess we can move Kartik to on the, yes, thank you very much, perfect. And Kartik is passionate about universal education. He had a number of challenges in his own life which he was able to transform, in fact, in ways to be resilient and to build things for others. And I think his story is going to be extremely interesting. We have to say goodbye to Daniela, who just left us. But please, Kartik, the floor is yours.
To have me, great to be joining you all virtually. So my thoughts are very similar to what other speakers just talked about. So there are over 1.27 billion people with disabilities around the world. And for the longest time, people have primarily relied on others for even the most basic of things, such as reading, writing, traveling, and so on. But this century has seen remarkable progress in technology that has helped people with disabilities be more independent and empowered than ever before, using such things as a screen reader, which basically reads out everything on the computer screen, or real-time captioning for someone who is hard of hearing. But one of the questions that I always had, and which I'm going to try and explore in this talk through my experiences and share with you guys, is, are people with disabilities only consumers, or they can be innovators and entrepreneurs as well? When I think of entrepreneurship, it's very much innovation, whether that is maybe within another company that you are in, much of like what Kelly described, like creativity. So can they be creative? Can they be innovators? Or are they just consumers of technology? And if they can be innovators, then why do we not see more of people with disabilities, or more broadly speaking, people from underrepresented communities in entrepreneurship? Like, what are the challenges that are holding us back? And what can we do to fix some of those challenges, or how I went about in my own personal experience? So to share my own journey, so I grew up in Delhi in India, and I went to a special school for the blind, then went to a mainstream school, had a great school life. Everything was great, participating in all extracurricular activities, and having fun with like all other students, and super accepting and receptive. So that was great to be a part of that school. But it was the 10th grade when I hit a roadblock. That was the time when I had to make a choice for the rest of my high school to decide between science, commerce, or humanities, which are the three educational tracks that are offered in India. And I was pretty confident about my choice. It had to be sciences because I was passionate about the innovation and being able to do something for other people with disabilities since a very young age. But at that time, the government had this rule where blind students could not pursue science because they thought that it would not be possible for someone who's blind to be able to manage lab work and a bunch of other things that is a part of science. So it took me a bunch of 24 letters to the chairman, a personal demonstration, 9 months to finally convince him of the ability of people with disabilities. And then once I enrolled in science in the 11th grade, there was no accessible material. Just like Kelly mentioned, lack of resources. It's super important to have, a support system in place that can help you out. And that was exactly what was completely lacking. How do I, for example, understand graphs? There's a lot of technology, for example, in the US that helps blind Americans, understand graphs. But how in a developing country do you go about doing that? And that is when I started innovating. And that is when how people were talking about entrepreneurship is not something that you think about, you're going to be an entrepreneur one day. It's about identifying that need and then understanding, are you the right person to go about solving that? And how can you do that? So I was in a math class, and a teacher he drew a curve on the board. It was a parabola for those technical folks out there who love math. So it was a parabola, and they were explaining the properties. And I was like, how do I go about understanding that or visualizing this? And I'm super excited about music. So I was like, okay, well, can I actually combine music and somehow create this graph into music? Can I basically convert that into a variation of musical frequencies that would give me an understanding of the curve? And this is how, for example, a y equals x squared plotted between -10 and 10 would sound like for me. Ooh. And that's weird, I know. What that basically means is the curve is first decreasing or the sloping down, then it was constant at a point, and then the slope was increasing. So the challenges that I faced, for example, in the 11th and 12th grades, helped me to innovate, helped me to explore what can I do. And that was the first time I started thinking about entrepreneurship. Now, well, 12th grade is all good. What do you do after that? Like, what do you do? You will probably want to go to a post-secondary education or an engineering school to be able to develop your knowledge further. And that is when I hit another roadblock. For the longest time ever, they have always maintained it's not possible for someone who's blind or visually impaired to pursue engineering. And they just wanted to stick to that notion. And so I tried convincing the authorities for 3 years, trying to work with them to provide reasonable accommodations to help me take their entrance examination. And I failed. It didn't work out at all. And that is when I decided exploring international opportunities and came to Stanford in 2013. And one of the things that I saw here was just how different the entire education system was. The focus was not so much on learning those hard skills only. It was also about being able to put them to use, being able to apply those skills to problems and challenges that we face, which I loved and which I think is the way forward, as some of the other speakers also mentioned. And that is when I, again, got back to about it. I think it's actually good in some sense that I had to face, for example, reluctance at the Indian institutes, because that gave me a purpose. That gave me a purpose to innovate, a purpose to be an entrepreneur. It wasn't as if I just wanted to be start my own startup just because it was a fancy, cool thing to do. Sure, people in Silicon Valley think that way, but I had a reason here. I had a problem that I had faced myself that I wanted to really solve for India. And that is when I started with my organization, starting with Project STEM Access that provided mentorship opportunities to students with disabilities in India, to nextbillion.org, which is a global mentorship program for disabilities interested in tech, and now iSTEM, which is again focused on the developing countries, where we're trying to see how we can use technology to automate and improve the experience of students with disabilities, particularly in developing countries, as far as university is concerned. So this is my story. And when you look at it, again, going back to why is it that there aren't as many people with disabilities, or more broadly speaking, people from the underrepresented communities who get to innovate, who can be entrepreneurs? And as is evident from my story, the first challenge that I see is this lack of awareness and sensitivity and our preconceived notions about certain groups in the society. We always make these assumptions. People with disabilities, they can't do this. People of color, they can't do this, or they are better suited to do this kind of a job. So I think first, it's not only about government, it's not only about universities or whatever, it's about all of us. I think the first thing that needs to happen more generally, also for, of course, the success of the SDGs, is changing our own mindsets and being open to change, being open to allowing everyone to realize their potential, and really being able to take advantage of whatever opportunities they have, and then supporting them in whatever way we can. And of course, the governments and the universities, education institutions, and the corporates have a larger responsibility to ensure that there are programs in place, to ensure that change is embraced, to ensure that there are avenues to innovate, and people can do something about the problems that they face. If from the very beginning there's a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation at the grassroots level, then I think there are going to be far better entrepreneurs, not just entrepreneurs who are earning millions and billions of dollars in Silicon Valley or wherever, but also entrepreneurs who genuinely understand the situation, who really want to do something about it, who have all the knowledge because they understand all of this firsthand, who can go about and change the world. And that, I think, is eventually going to help us also realize the SDGs as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kartik. I think your experience was extremely interesting, also because I think the concept you expressed, meaning we have to sometimes rethink whether something is possible or not possible, talks a lot about the way we perceive our limitations. Sometimes we are very boxed in a way in the reality that we live, as you say, and we are not able to see that something is indeed possible if we just change the perspective. So thank you so much, Kartik, for your experience. And we move on to the next speaker, who's Tiffany Lowe from New York. She's also an entrepreneur, and part of her entrepreneurial experience is, in fact, to help others that are experiencing difficulties and, in some cases, abuses in the workplace. So the floor is yours, Tiffany. Thank you for sharing your experience.
Hello? Oh, first time here, sorry. So I'm Tiffany Lowe. I'm a gender rights activist, and I'm a part of the executive team at CHEN. We're an award-winning social enterprise that fights gender-based violence around the globe by using technology and opening up the information. I'm very happy to be here. I'm really excited to share this experience of CHEN's community. Now, CHEN was started by a young person, actually, and she was trying to tackle inequality, and we mostly focus on the Sustainable Development Goals of gender equality. So that's our main goals there. Now, we're 400 people strong, volunteer-led network with many survivors of abuse being a part of our community. And in the past 5 years, we've reached more than 200,000 people through our online resources. Now, I'm not sure if anyone's a little bit aware of the gender equality goals, but I'm just going to go through it real quickly. So 1 in 3 women around the world will come to face to face with violence in their lifetime. And 1 in 5 women and girls, including 19% of women and girls aged 15 to 49, have experienced physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner within the last 12 months. And yet 49 countries have no laws that specifically protect women from such violence. So as an international community, CHEN has actually helped a lot of its volunteers in the work that we do gain new skills, and 70% of the volunteers felt that they've actually acquired new skills. We see a lot of our volunteers come to us with low skills and confidence, and this is especially true for some survivors and of abuse. So we teamed up with them through one-on-one mentoring, social support, training, and hands-on training, which is why many volunteers end up starting their own entrepreneurial networks. Many in Chen's community are using entrepreneurship to the same, be it for profit or nonprofit, or by hybrid to tackle sustainable development goals, such as we have one volunteer who's with us, Nadia. Currently, she's working on writing and directing films on women's issues in India. And then there's Rachel, who is using capsule wardrobes for women fleeing domestic abuse in Scotland and the UK. And Hane is running a tech boot camp league wagon for entrepreneurships in Morocco, boosting women's participation, and also now using Chen's connection to share our Arabic resources on manipulation in relationships in Morocco. So our online communities are powerful support networks for boosting youth entrepreneurships, and we ourselves are a result of it. Hera Hussein founded Chen in 2013 when she was only 23 years old. She helped two friends escape an abusive marriage and experienced significant challenges in finding basic information like their rights and how to cope with trauma. Hera thought if she could just put together critical information and easy language online, it could change lives and solve real problems. Now, because Hera was already a part of, I would say, a mentorship called Make Sense, an online hub for social entrepreneurs, she was able to reach out to this huge network. She soon had the resources and knowledge to start, and social media is the essence of Chain. And without it, we wouldn't exist, let alone grow. It initially enabled us to launch many crowdsourced platforms, and since then, it has enabled us to both run our organization and have direct contact with volunteers and women we are trying to help. And now Chain is mobilizing young people and showing them that they do not need to be a millionaire or have an office to start your own enterprise. And that's basically what we do there.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. Thank you for sharing your experience and what the organization that you're working with is doing. And now we move on to another entrepreneur. His name is Richard Lorenzen. I think Daniela was mentioning some Italian connection. That's why I say Lorenzen, as Italians would say. But in any case, so Richard is going to be, I think, an interesting person here on the panel, also because entrepreneurs always tend to look for funding, whereas I read in Richard's biography that he's also an investor. So be careful, you'll have many people that will approach you afterwards. Meanwhile, please tell us a little bit more about your experience related to the topic that we're discussing today. Thank you.
So thank you for having me. Thank you to UNDESA for inviting me here today. Youth entrepreneurship is a topic that I'm really glad that we're talking about. And I'm also really glad to see so many young people sitting in the room here coming into the conversation. I started my company when I was 15 years old, so kind of similar to Kelly. I started very young, and by the time I was 16 years old, I had a multi-six-figure business in revenue. I dropped out of college at 18 to continue growing my business, and until where we are today as a multi-million-dollar company. Now I'm 26 years old, and I spend a lot of time speaking and working with organizations that mentor youth entrepreneurs and look at how we can solve issues related to empowering more young people who want to start a business. And I work here in the United States and also around the world. I do a lot of speaking in Europe and in Asia and the Middle East, looking at how do we solve the obstacles to entrepreneurship for young people on a global level. And what's interesting is that so many different regions have their own unique obstacles and barriers that they're trying to confront. But there are also a lot of common denominators that I've found all countries are facing right now. So I kind of want to address those three today and talk a little bit about what they are and how we might be able to solve them. And a big part of that, keep in mind, is bringing more young people to the table and bringing them into that dialogue. I meet with a lot of government agencies who want to figure out how they can promote and empower more youth entrepreneurs. And I'll be the only person under 40 years old who's sitting at that table. So it doesn't work that way. We need to bring young people into the fold if we want to solve a lot of the issues that they're dealing with. The three common denominators that I found that really promote youth entrepreneur, and not just youth entrepreneurship, but also anybody who's looking to start a business, whether it's your second career, your third career, or just a completely new career path than what you've already taken. Those three that have really stood out were access to information, or in other words, education, but it's become a much broader, thanks to technology and social media, it's become a much broader realm. And then the other one, the second one, is access to mentorship, which we'll talk a little bit about today. It's not just enough to have the access to that information, but you do need somebody who can show you how to properly apply it, who's already gone down that path before. And then the third one, of course, is culture and environment. And that's something that I've really seen fluctuate across all the different countries that I've traveled to and I've met with about youth entrepreneurship. They all face different issues. But they're in the United States, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Asia, they're all facing issues with barriers in culture for young people to become an entrepreneurship. There's a stigma, for example, around failure, especially in some countries in Europe, where a lot of young people are very hesitant to become an entrepreneur or start a new venture, and honestly, anybody at any age, because of the stigma associated with failure, with a failed venture, maybe with bankruptcy. And that's one example where we've done a little bit better in the United States with overcoming, but it's still something that's very persistent everywhere, especially among young people who don't think that anybody's going to take them seriously as an entrepreneur if you're in college, in university, or even recently graduated with not as much private sector experience. Another issue related to culture also kind of ties back to that is the whole issue around age. A lot of young people who want to start a business are deterred by the fact that they think they aren't going to be taken seriously, that there's not going to be trust among the business community to buy a product or a service from them. I started at 15 years old. Technology is one of the areas that's really aided that because just for me, for example, I, from the ages of 15 through 20, never met a single client of my business in person. Technology, the internet, social media allowed me to be able to conduct all the business that I did online and still build a multi-six-figure business. And that was 12 years ago. And now today, the social media and the tools that we have, the technology that we have is even better than it was then. And it allows us to communicate from anywhere, to work remotely, to be able to build an entire company using apps and software that has recently become available in the past 5 years to overcome a lot of those barriers around age and around trust, and also a lot of those geographic barriers for people who maybe you live in Ohio here in the United States, or maybe you live in Karachi, or maybe you live in an area where there isn't a highly developed economy for you to build your startup in. But thanks to technology, you can now access a market in New York City or in London or in Hong Kong, where you can sell your products and your services. I run a public relations company. We serve technology companies, financial companies. We also work in the policy space and with NGOs. And I was able to sell marketing services to multi-million-dollar corporations at 15 years old from the bedroom of my parents' house because I had a laptop and I had an internet connection, and I was able to brand myself and build a business using the tools that were available then, not even as good as they are today, to be able to build that business. So access to information, showing young people, there's so much information now today. It's even better than when I was starting out. You can go online and you can Google, or you can go to YouTube and you can learn what a startup is, and you can learn how to find funding. You can learn how to create a product, how to bring it to market. And a lot of that information is free. So we're not even talking about anymore as much of an issue around how do we get access to traditional education, which is still important, but we're also talking about how do we better use the information that is available. We have more information at our fingertips today than world leaders had 20 years ago before technology, a lot of this technology was created. How do we better use the technology and the access to information that's there? And a lot of that goes back to culture. It's how do we encourage more young people to be able to take advantage of that technology, to be able to take that risk and go out and start their business. And then number two, how do we provide them with the mentors who can give them the tools and the resources and the sounding board to continue and persist when it gets difficult, because it always does. I work with an organization here in the United States called Junior Achievement, and it's an NGO, it's private sector. It acts as a bridge that connects young people in high schools across the country who are interested in entrepreneurship with mentors in the given field that they're interested in, who can help them with writing a business plan, who can help them with learning about how do you go about even starting a business, how do you bring a product to market. Every year they have a business plan competition that high schools around the country compete in. And for anybody who's seen the show Shark Tank, it's similar to Shark Tank, where a team of students will come in and pitch their business plan to a panel of judges. I happen to be one of the judges. And the tools and resources and mentorship that we've been able to provide these kids at a very young age in high school has actually turned into real businesses, successful companies, and real entrepreneurs who then graduate school, and whether they go to university or whether they go a different path, continue to pursue entrepreneurship, and it becomes a very real career path for them. So, what I would say is, traveling all over the world, I've seen that, I think there's more interest than ever before in young people becoming entrepreneurs. There's more awareness out there than ever before, but there's still a lot of questions around how do I do it? And then how do I find somebody who's a model from a similar background as me that I can look to as a role model or as a mentor that I can learn from and then go and replicate that. So it's really important that we work together as a private sector, as government, as NGOs, and look at how we can provide that bridge so that we're connecting people and showing them how to use the resources they already have, connecting them with mentors who can help them take it further, and then also looking at how do we address that culture around failure, around trust, around creating an economy that is more willing. And this is something we kind of have in the U.S., but it's an issue in Europe, and it's an issue I speak in Japan and in Korea, with a willingness to do business with new companies, with startups, with younger people who have less experience. So how do we address that culture? How do we build that trust? This way we are helping those young people who have that desire, they have that willingness, and they just need that early push and that help to get there. And then there's so much potential, untapped talent, for what they could create to help us reach the goals that we've set for 2030. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for sharing, in fact, concepts and coming from practical experiences that you had. And it looks like, again, you had a lot as well, same as I was saying for Kelly. And now we move on to our last panelist. He also comes from Italy. His name is Pietro Focchi. And he has a social enterprise which is called EduActive. And I think it's interesting, and probably we will hear through Pietro, in fact, how youth entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship are very connected, and whether, in fact, social entrepreneurship is one of the ways that, in general, entrepreneurship can respond to some of our current challenges. Pietro, floor is yours.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, if any, Mr. Moderator, dear panelists, and dear guests, forgive me for being institutional, but that is part of my nature and my role. So I would like to start by thanking UNDESA and the ISD for the invitation, which shows a real commitment to youth by the entire UN system, following the recent Youth 2030 strategy and all of the tools addressing inter alia inclusion and engagement of youth in decision-making and input-providing processes. Slide. Sustainable Development Goals 17, as it was recalled by Mr. Moderator, our target 17, encourages and promotes effective public-private, and civil society partnerships. Let me then begin by introducing myself, as I'm humbled to connect different sectors. First, as a young person, I've always engaged with youth led organizations and movements at a local, national, and international level. As young advocate, I had the chance to measure the feelings and changes that the young civil society faces in my community. Second, I have the honor to represent Italy in my capacity as official youth delegate of Italy to the United Nations. And this role expresses Italy's recognition of the multifaceted added value of an increased participation of young people in all aspects of the society, as Her Excellency Ambassador Zappia recalled only a few days ago addressing the Commission for Social Development. Third, together with an amazing team of change makers, a few years ago I embarked on the adventure of social entrepreneurship through the experience of EduActive. In this light, I would like to underline that yes, it is possible to embrace the civil society, the public, and the private sector all in one. However, my question is, why do youth still struggle to get involved with institutions and with businesses, whether they look for support to their projects or to access the labor market? This is one of the driving questions that led the founding group of EduActive to opt for a social enterprise, well aware on one hand to deal with tight regulations and on the other with the ambitious aim to have a significant impact on society. Slide. Hence, on these days of CSocD, it is pivotal to exchange on the social feature of entrepreneurship. Youth entrepreneurship has itself an intrinsic social value, since it provides youngsters not only with job opportunities, but also with a chance to gain a first-hand experience of the market they act in. However, the social impact of a youth venture has not to be taken for granted. Shall not only be embodied in the formal frame of the company, but also be the main propulsive force of it. Mr. Moderator, allow me to go through the ingredients of social youth entrepreneurship by showcasing the work of EduActive in order to provide concrete examples to say more theoretical concepts. EduActive aims to contribute to building a collective awareness on a better and more sustainable future for all, not just youth. It does so by tackling two main issues young people, namely teenagers and young adults, face in my country. The first is their struggle in accessing the labor market or a lack of competitiveness as workers. The second is the still not sufficient openness to the international scene, which results from the difficulty not to have international opportunities provided, rather to know how to look for and how to find them. From these starting points, fully comprehended by both the Agenda 2030 and the European Union strategies and policies, we created EduActive and its tools. Today, we plan and implement or facilitate learning experiences at different levels, working as youth, with youth, and for youth. Before getting into details on Edu actions, the activities we carry on daily, I would consider identifying some more shades of youth entrepreneurship. It is a learning experience itself for all those working in such an environment, and as Kelly was recalling earlier, taking relevant responsibilities is the first big challenge young entrepreneurs deal with. Decision-making is experienced on legal, economical, and strategic issues of any kind every day. The effort in building a brand new working structure, usually with a very limited initial investment, requires high levels of self-consciousness, adaptability, and risk-taking abilities. Moreover, reaching financial sustainability goes hand in hand with the major goals I have mentioned before. Please consider that a social enterprise is still a company that must survive and perform precisely to fulfill its social mission. Sometimes this requirement is forgotten, and this misleads to dangerous confusions with charitable organizations. Sustainable financial models set up by young companies today will ensure a fairer market tomorrow and help the economic environment to play an essential role in positive development. Slide. To reach this extent, we cannot avoid considering challenges youth entrepreneurs face at any stage of their work. I want to take a quick voyage over. Let me tell you a little story before. Every time I am supposed to meet for the first time someone in charge, it can be a banker, a high-level public officer, an investor, and so on and so forth, I get at the right meeting point, at the right meeting time, and I usually hear oh, please don't bother me. I'm waiting for the person. And guess what? That person is exactly me. Discrimination against youth wear different masks and affect a variety of situations. From the access to a specific market to the support at an early stage, from the relationship with stakeholders to those with the consultants, a young entrepreneur has constantly and tenaciously to assert himself or herself. On this regard, he starts with a considerable and pressing disadvantage in the path of reaching accountability. At the same time, a barrier to the growth of youth enterprises is that of skills development. Learning from your own mistakes is great, but is not only and always enough to perform better and the next chance. Mr. Moderator, dear all, we are not here only to raise concerns, but also to exchange on feasible solutions. As foreseen, I want to share with you what EduActive does in order to give answers to today's topic, addressing inequality through youth entrepreneurship. Slide. First, the contribution to change happens through tailor-made learning experiences implemented with non-formal education tools within public high schools, going from annual projects on integration and diversities to thematic workshops and contests on the SDGs and on the works and the values of international organizations, first of all, the United Nations. Participants to our EduActions, which are co-designed with teachers in Italy, are guided to elaborate concrete actions for the implementation of the 2030 agenda within their communities and beyond. Slide. We also run international learning experiences, and I'm thrilled to welcome today here at the UN some excellent students among the thousands beneficiaries of our projects. We also work to build new bridges and strengthen the existing ones, connecting the different sectors, and we do so by interacting with the old range of stakeholders. Our flexibility and creative power as youngsters, which can be a threat to a linear path, is turned into strength. And thank you for this slide. This is the right one. When it comes to giving answer to need of gaining know-how and not just creating it, we pledge to be mentored both by senior experts and thanks to structured programs. In 2 years of activity, EduActive has been internationally recognized by the inclusion in prestigious fellowship. Last year, we joined YTILI, Young Transatlantic Innovation Leaders Initiative, flagship project of the US Department of State run by the German Marshall Fund, aimed to connect and to intersect enterprises at different stages of advancement from both sides of the ocean. This year, we are taking part in Rise for Change, mentorship program by Fondazione CRT, implemented by the UN IDO, that is meant to support the development and the scaling of social enterprises in the Mediterranean area. Both are unique opportunities to fight inequalities through entrepreneurship. Slide, please. I'm concluding by mentioning the next challenge we are taking in the wake of previous initiatives by Passi Società Cooperativa, the construction of entrepreneurial hubs connecting a developed and an undeveloped country, giving a chance to the first to expand its market and to the latter to learn from experienced examples of business management. The plan is to start from Mozambique and Ecuador and to begin with Italy on the other side. Slide. Dear friends, I'm going to conclude by remembering that sooner than what we think, youth of today will be adults, carrying the legacy we're building today and suffering the consequences of the mistakes we have done in the past and of those we are doing today. Youth social entrepreneurship can effectively be a way to turn the boat around. Let's then support it, and let's do it together, and let's do it now. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Pietro, for sharing your experience and for being very precise in doing so. I think before moving and opening to questions and answers, I just want to say two things. One, I will give in a second the floor again to UNDESA and to Isabelle Garet, who's here. But I also want to say that we have a little bit more time, in fact, compared to what was the original schedule. We were supposed to end now at 2:30, but in fact we have time until 3 p.m. Of So we don't have to necessarily go until 3 p.m. Maybe people have other commitments, but anyway, this gives us a little bit of room for Q&A. Isabelle Legaré, she's a social affairs officer with UNDESA, and she's the person, in fact, responsible for the World Youth Report on youth social entrepreneurship, which was mentioned before by Daniela. So Isabelle, floor is yours.
So I just want to complement a little bit what Daniela mentioned earlier today. So yes, indeed, the youth program at the UN is working to develop the World Youth Report on Youth Social Entrepreneurship as a tool toward the 2030 agenda. And so this report is a contribution to the global initiative on decent jobs for youth, which is a worldwide framework and alliance of varied partners, including UN partners, but more diverse than that. So it's a platform, an alliance of people working together to advance the system for decent jobs for youth. So we're today publicly, officially announcing that the report will be a contribution to the global initiative. And let me just take 30 more seconds, if I can, to explain a little bit what the report is about. So the overall objective of the report is to make sure that at the national level and at the regional level as well, the ecosystems that are put in place to support young social entrepreneurs are enabling, are adapted to the reality of young people. So what I mean by ecosystem is all of the support system that young social entrepreneurs need to reach their full potential as individuals, but youth social entrepreneurship as a tool reach its full potential as well. So it goes from the mentorship that you mentioned, from inclusive financial products and services, education, infrastructure, network, and all of these market labors, policies, all of the ingredients that are needed to be put together in the right way, the right combination for young social entrepreneurs as individuals and for youth social entrepreneurship as a tool, as an activity to have a real impact on society and also to advance the 2030 agenda. So the report seeks to give the ingredients, give guidance on the ingredients to be put in place. And we do this report in an inclusive manner. We, of course, consulted experts, but we also consult young social entrepreneurs. We listen to them and we ask them what they need. And without you even knowing it, you're part of that exercise today. So thank you very much for that. And the report will be launched toward the end of 2019, early 2020. So stay tuned. I think it'll be very interesting reading.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. I think we want to open to questions that, in fact, are coming here. And just before doing so, I want to thank again the panelists here for sharing their experience. And I just want to mention 5 learnings that I can summarize what we heard. One was, in fact, we had a number of ingredients from each one of these experiences that might be needed for youth entrepreneurship to succeed. And in fact, we were lucky that the entrepreneurs who were here seem to be pretty successful. I have to say also, and this is the second point, that I think we all got a piece of inspiration from the people who were here. The third point is, however, is that, as I think Kelly was mentioning, there are 1.8 billion young people in the world. And so, of course, here we have the people who have made it, but there are another very good number of people that are struggling. And so how those concepts of youth entrepreneurship can be applied not only to a very thin layer of the best, but can be applied at scale. I think the fourth point is, I was reading a few weeks ago, I think on the Stanford Review for Social Innovation, that was saying that, in fact, the best startups, contrary to what we might think, the best startups and the ones that have the highest success rate and the highest survival, so since they start, are not the ones started by young people, but are the ones started by people between 40 and 50 years old. It's something that personally made me very happy, because I'm 38, I said 2 more years, and now it's my turn. But in general, yes. But in general, the question is how things are shaped in a way that things are made easier for young people to be successful, even in their own startups, in their own entrepreneurial projects. And the fifth point is we are at the UN, we are at the place where normally the international community, governments dialogue together. And so what the UN, what governments should actually do to make the life of young entrepreneurs easier. With this said, these are questions and points that we take here, but let's listen now from the people who attended what are other questions, other experiences, and that eventually you want to share. So the floor is open. You just put your hand up and so that I can see. One there. Just say your name, where you are from, eventually what is your main activity, and then ask the question. Just be concise. Thank you very much.
Everyone, my name is Nicole. Born and raised in New York. I'm a graduate student at NYU studying global public health. Thank you to each of the panelists for sharing your experiences. I am a newly realized entrepreneur. I decided to compete in a school-wide competition, and my team won, and we've been given resources to continue, and now I'm battling this idea of, oh, great, I'm going to become an entrepreneur now, and it's very exciting. But what I'm really interested in hearing is, how do you define youth? What's the population? What does that mean to you? Is it just high school kids? Is it college kids? Can it be individuals who have experience and then are going back to school because they'd like to continue learning? And I'm also interested to hear what you would recommend for individuals who might want to cross into the entrepreneurial world, but are also facing challenges such as the cultural bias or gender bias that might be associated with doing that. Thank you.
Very good. Maybe we take 3 questions at a time, and then we have the panelists respond. Second one, who wants to eventually ask any question? No, everything is so clear. One there. Please, gentlemen. Open the microphone there. There is a button. Perfect.
Can you hear me? I'm Thomas. I represent the Solution Missions, and prior to coming here in October, I was in India, so I will have a question to Karthik later, the national convener of an organized network called Vadana Thoda Keep Your Promise campaign. Now, I was struck by the slide Pietro Focchi put up there, where you had the 3 Ps. You know, we encapsulate the entire SDGs under 5 Ps: people, planet, peace, participation. But the other P was basically prosperity. Now, that is the conflict that comes up with entrepreneurship and business. You have put up there profit. So the consensus that we have on sustainable development goals is people, planet, prosperity, participation, and peace. Now, the growing inequality is because we realize that it's not because of lack of growth. Every engine that drives growth is also driving inequality. This is a study finding that we have got. Wherever there is exponential growth, we also find exponential inequality growing. My country, for instance, 9 people in India has 50% of all the wealth, 450 million people. So when you put profit as the important P in sustainable development goals, we are definitely getting into a conflict with prosperity. So how do you sort of handle it? Because, the study says that entrepreneurs, startups are being bought up by multinationals. A good, successful entrepreneurship is being sold out at a great profit to a multinational, and you have got monopolies growing all over the world. So that's one important question. I'm finding it very difficult to understand this, So one. The second, I don't know if Karthik is still there on listening to this. Karthik, are you there? I'm from India, and if you're listening to me, we would be very interested you to be in touch with our network, which is known as Don't Break Your Promise campaign, and we would like to have people with disabilities as integral partners with that network. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any other question for this round there is still room for one person? No, not for now. So maybe later. Maybe we can go the same order that we had. So Kelly, please go first.
So I'll address your question first. Now, obviously, it depends on the culture and where you are for definition of youth. Majority of governments look under 30 as the youth generation, but if you're looking at really millennials and Gen Z, that's going to really be under 40 because millennials are almost now nearing 40. So really, what I would also preface with that for businesses and executives listening to this too, to also break that stereotype that youth does not just mean student and teen that you see as your children. Youth or young people, when we're referring to that, these are, in a lot of cases, they're moving up to middle management in your companies. And this is the generation that will literally be running the world when 2030 comes. So if we don't include them in those conversations and see them as an active partner in achieving the SDGs, we're going to run into a lot of difficulties when we're near 2030 and they're taking over the companies and starting to take those senior leadership roles. To answer your second question about the transition and the bias, I see a lot right now when we look at programs that are looking to address entrepreneurship, and I would definitely say there isn't a lack of initiatives looking at youth entrepreneurs. I think it's really where we focus. There's a lot of initiatives that focus on ideation, on starting up an idea. And I really believe, and from my personal experience, the challenge isn't so much coming up with the ideas. It's more so on the what's next, on the implementation and the scaling of an idea. And this is what Richard had talked on a bit as well, of the guidance, the mentorship, and the culture. My company, Laval Corporation, did a national study in Canada just the other year looking at the barriers for millennials and Gen Z on building their careers. And entrepreneurship was a segment. And the top barrier for them, that they, over 2/3 acknowledged that it was guidance on how to get started and scale. And the second being on attracting the business and customers. So it wasn't the startup costs, although many perceived that is why they couldn't start. The actual challenges they faced was actually more so in the moving and growing stage. Because if we don't address that stage, we ending up with a scenario where we have all these startup ideas and we have all these businesses popping up everywhere, which could result in a lot of duplication and things, but no one actually getting to a point of sustainability. And I think that's really where we need to focus, and where I'd encourage programs to really focus on is that, I call it the Goldilocks scenario of like, we look at the middle step as the key to building that prosperity in your community. And with the gender gap as well. I hear you. I definitely think it's an issue. But really what you have to understand is that there's barriers regardless of where you come from. And as an entrepreneur, your job is to innovate beyond those barriers. You're already trying to solve a problem and create a new path for yourself. And you really need to believe in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, no one else will. And I think as soon as you find the strength and understanding that you're worthy and what you're doing is worthy, other people do see that as well. And that's kind of the start to really overcoming some of those barriers.
Thank you very much, Kelly. We want to move to Victoria. Victoria, are you there? Great.
Yeah, here I am. Yeah, so in order to address the question that you're just starting after winning the competition, is kind of the same thing that's happened to me in a way. So I would just like, as an advice, is like, be prepared to do mistakes. You're going to do mistakes, but you will learn from each one of them. So, I mean, I did a lot of mistakes. I didn't know anything about entrepreneurship. I had to learn kind of on my own. So it was not an easy experience, and it's kind of a roller coaster of a lot of ups and downs. But it's also really interesting, and the amount of people that you get to meet, the amount of experiences I had with the entrepreneurship are really amazing. And in terms of the gender, I come from two industries that are very male dominated, which is aerospace and farming. So it was definitely a challenge. But to be honest, I never felt in the farming industry like when I went to customers or anything, I never felt like there was any sort of discrimination because of me being a woman. What I felt is that sometimes many people were like not sure about my idea or about what I'm proposing because I was very young and people didn't know me. But then as I started going through with the project and really advancing with the project, then I think that gave a lot more credibility to everything. So I think it's just a matter of also in many cases proving what you're doing and getting the trust of the customers.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Kartik, are you still there? Kartik is not there anymore, unfortunately, but we might find other ways to connect you to Kartik. Yes. Yes, we will find other ways. So let's go to Tiffany.
Yeah, the last question that you had about, gender equality, especially in the workplace. I'm a full stack developer as well, and a tech industry, I would say, is like a big, still trying to like get in there and like be equal in that department. But I think a good example would be going back to Chen. What we do is what we're trying to do is we're really crowdsourcing. We're trying to build that culture, and kind of touching on what Kelly was saying too. That's not a really, I guess, super easy answer to that kind of question, because we're still, I think, paving that way. We're still trying to make things happen, but we're still, seeing a lot of like victories and success happening with women or other, inequalities that happen as well. But what Chen is doing, we're really just trying to be that, torch, so to speak, and trying to build content and making sure our content and our products are, what's the word? For everybody, is not just for one person reading it. And it's going to take time, but I see a lot of progress happening, now in 2019 and in the years in past. But we have a long way to go. I definitely agree. Just want to kind of answer that second question for you.
Thank you very much. Richard?
So to address your question about the definition of youth, it's really a definition that's expanded a lot in the past 10 years to define exactly what is a youth entrepreneur. And a lot of that is because of technology and because of social media that's enabled so many increasingly younger people to be able to come into the market as an entrepreneur and start a business. And while there's a lot of programs meant to assist young entrepreneurs and to provide resources to help them, it also hasn't kept up with the expansion of that age range. In the United States, we have a program called Young Presidents Organization, YPO, and I believe that they define youth entrepreneurship as presidents under the age of 40. So you can imagine somebody who's 18 years old wouldn't necessarily, even in that type of organization, feel welcome in that room when you are in a room of people between the ages of mostly 35 and 40 who are running much larger companies. So I think it's a broad definition for sure, But we need to look at, how we can continue to expand the programs and the resources that we are providing to people in high school, in college, recently graduated from college. A lot of those people who still don't feel that they're necessarily included in the youth entrepreneurship community due to a lack of experience or credentials or whatnot.
Thank you very much, Richard. Pietro, up to you. Also remember the question,
absolutely.
prosperity versus profit.
I do, definitely do. So if you don't mind, madam, I'll go straight to the second question that it was specifically addressed to me. First of all, my apologies, sir, as clearly the slide, the PowerPoint slide was misleading. Because first point, it was not showing the 5 Ps SDGs are usually gathered and collected in. So that was not at all nor the purpose nor the graph itself. It was actually meant to offer some kind of contrast showing the regular very, very basic graph of regular business with some social responsibility, profit included as a regular business, and to compare it, but it had to be some kind of interaction and interlistening between my words and the slide, but I'm very glad you paid attention to the slide as well. That doesn't happen that often. And it was meant to show a contrast between regular businesses with some social responsibility and youth social businesses, ventures, the way you want to call it. As I said, and I recall that while regular businesses measure their performances on the basis of the profit, we do not the opposite, but we do other way, which is on the social impact. So impact measurement is crucial. And if you want to get into details and fact checking, Eduactive itself cannot make any profit by law and does not make any profit because this is the way, the legal frame we choose for the enterprises. Okay.
Thank you very much, Pietro. And I would like, since the first question, how do we define youth, I think is very relevant given the role that Isabel currently has. I would like to ask Isabel to respond to this question as well. Thank you.
I was hoping to get through the meeting without having to answer that question, but I guess I will. So there's a short and a long answer. So the short answer is that for statistical purposes, UNDESA considers youth as those between the ages of 15 and 24. But put that aside. For everything else, we understand that youth is a transition phase, and we don't put numbers on that. For example, in the World Youth Report, we have young people. We have young people who came to discuss the content of the report who were 34 years old. So we don't put numbers because we understand that it's very much of a fluid identity. It's a transitional identity. We also don't do prejudice to member states' definitions of youth. There are some countries for which youth goes up to 40-some years old. I think it's like 45 years old. In some countries, that's the extreme. So we tell them, okay, whatever you do, nationally, you use your own definition. So we see this as a life stage, and we don't put a beginning and an end with numbers on it. It's very much like self-identified. But when we have to do numbers, we use 15 to 24 so that we're able to compare apples to apples, for example, like employment rates between countries or other kind of statistical purposes. So does that help? Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much. We have a short time for 2 or 3 very short questions. Maybe I would ask whoever asked the questions also maybe to address 1 or 2 specific panelists, so it's going to make the responses easier. There is a question there, please.
Hi, my name is Rebecca, and I'm an undergrad at Columbia University. And naturally, a lot of my friends are interested in, starting their own companies and such, but it entails a lot of risk-taking. And I know, Richard, you dropped out of college, but I know that's, a decision that not a lot of people are willing to make. And I was wondering, when was it that you decided that this was something that you wanted to go all in? And I know people oftentimes say just believe in yourself and take the leap, but that's not really a practical answer, So like, when do you know that this is something that you want to go all in and risk the things that you have to risk?
1 second, Richard. Let's take the other questions all together and then we respond. One there. Yeah, you.
Hi, my name is Veronica. I come from Italy, and I have 2 questions for Richard Lorenzen. So you spoke about entrepreneurship and the importance of having young people on the table. So I was wondering, what are the main areas that interest young people? And regarding investors, what are the main areas they look to invest in?
Thank you very much. Any other last question? No. Okay. So, Richard, please go ahead.
Okay. So I'll address risk-taking first. I get this question a lot because I speak at a lot of universities. I speak at a lot of high schools. And after I speak, one of the first questions is should I drop out of school to start my business? And what I usually tell people is, while I did it, and looking back, I made that decision to because I had a business that was already producing multiple 6 figures in revenue. So I knew that, I already had some sort of foundation there to work with rather than dropping out of school to completely start something from scratch. Now, the good part of that is today there's even more technology than there was when I started my business, and there are so many tools and resources available that will allow you to build your business while you're still in school that I personally don't even think that it's as much of a factor anymore to decide, do I want to spend the time on school or on a business? 4 years isn't a very long period of time. And thanks to technology and thanks to a lot of automation tools and software, you're able to build a business from anywhere. It could be from a dorm room and conduct business all over the world. So I wouldn't necessarily look at it as an either or decision. I would look at it as, how can I make sure that I'm using technology to the best that I can possibly use it to be able to leverage the time that I do have and still build a business. Unless, of course, you already have a business that's very successful, and then maybe there's more that weighs in to that decision. In terms of risk-taking in general, though, outside of school, there's obviously a lot more risk that weighs into that. You need to. I'm a big believer of building the business first, and then not necessarily. It doesn't need to be a big business, but getting your business to a point where it is somewhat stable. This way, you can justify the risk that you're taking, but everybody has a different risk profile. Everybody has a different tolerance for risk. So what works for one person may, give another person a nervous breakdown. So you really have to know yourself and know what your goals are, and then you can figure out how to take that risk. The good thing about being young is that you do have a lot of time to take those risks, recover from the ones that don't work out, and then take more. So hopefully that helps shed some light on it. And now for the second question, addressing specific areas that young people are interested in and investors. By far, young people are obviously interested in technology. They're interested in a lot of areas of technology, social media. Everybody, nowadays, it didn't even exist when I was a teenager, but nowadays everybody wants to start a business on YouTube, or they want to become a social media celebrity, or they're interested in blockchain or cryptocurrencies or AI. So I would definitely say that, young people are very interested in technology, but I would also encourage, and I do encourage, a lot of young people to look at all the other industries and opportunities that are out there. You don't necessarily need to start a software company because you're under 25 years old. You don't need to create an app or build the next Facebook. Look at where your skill set lies, look at where your interests lie, and look at where there's an opportunity in the market, because there's a lot of opportunities out there. And it's not so much choosing the right product or choosing the right trend to jump on as much as choosing something and sticking to it. And if you do choose something and you stick to it and you're persistent, that's what leads to success, rather than riding a temporary trend in the market for whatever happens to be big at this moment. And I would say the same applies to investors. Investors, while there are definitely areas that different investors specialize in, tech, healthcare, biomed, investors are looking at the founder. They want to invest in the person that's behind the company, much more than, is this in Bitcoin right now, or should I be in AI right now, or should I be in blockchain? They're looking at the founder who's behind the company, and that's who they're taking a bet on. because there are great founders who can turn a mediocre product into a big success, and there are founders that are not so good at what they're doing, that don't take the time to learn and to understand and to listen to advisors that take a great idea and run it into the ground. So focus on developing yourself, focus on developing a skill set, becoming great at something, and then you're going to find people who are willing to back it and to fund it because they believe in you more so than just the product or the trend in the market itself. Hope that helps.
And if I would just add one thing to that as well, when it looks at what industry you should pursue as an entrepreneur, my colleague mentioned tech, blockchain, all these different industries. I would actually challenge you not to look at an industry. Tech, blockchain, these things that we're talking about, AI, that is not the solution. They are tools to innovation. I challenge you and encourage you to find a problem you're passionate about solving. The industry will show itself based on the tools that you need to solve that problem. As I mentioned, I started off as a non-tech founder, but I went into tech because I needed to build the tools using that. So instead of kind of pursuing and saying, I want to start an app, think about what are you trying to solve, and then your industry will kind of lay itself out. Hope that helps.
Perfect. So we are at the end of the session. I would like very much to thank everyone who was present here. I would like to thank especially the panelists for bringing your experiences, and also I would say really for sharing a little bit of freshness in this context. I think that everyone is needed, and certainly at the UN this is appreciated. On the UN, I would say that what I understand from UNDESA, also from the World Youth Report that is coming out, this is the beginning of a path. So this youth entrepreneurship is a new topic, is a topic that is growing, and there are certainly investors that are interested in entrepreneurs, but also investors and funders that probably are interested for the UN, for international organizations, to look at what are the policies that are going to help young entrepreneurs. So in fact, since this is the beginning, I think, and we will certainly meet each other in similar contexts or in other contexts to discuss the same topics. Thanks everyone again, and have a nice rest of the day.